Doctors had given up on the case, but the gardener walked in and changed everything. Margaret Wilson had been motionless for 3 months and 7 days. The doctors at Mercy General Hospital in New York City had already exhausted all known protocols for catatonic state cases. The 72-year-old woman remained lying down, eyes open but empty, unresponsive to any stimuli. That's when Robert Johnson entered room 312, carrying his metal watering can. The 46-year-old man, with his time-worn beige cap and green gardening department shirt, stopped at the door upon recognizing that face. "Mrs. Margaret," he whispered, incredulous. The woman in the bed was the same person who had completely changed his life over 20 years ago. Robert dropped the watering can on the floor with a sharp noise that echoed through the hallway. Dr. Michael Anderson and Nurse Jennifer looked up, startled, from the doorway. No one had managed to get any reaction from Margaret since she had been admitted. Not even her own daughter Patricia could awaken the slightest sign of recognition in her. "Do you know the patient?" asked Dr. Michael, approaching. Robert couldn't answer immediately. His hands trembled slightly as he observed Margaret. Her white hair was well groomed, but her face was thin, lifeless. Nothing that reminded him of the vibrant teacher he had known. "She was my teacher," he finally said, "a long time ago." "Sir, you can't be here without authorization," intervened Nurse Jennifer. "This is a restricted wing." But something extraordinary happened at that moment. Margaret's fingers moved. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but Dr. Michael noticed immediately. "Wait," said the doctor, watching carefully. "Do it again. Talk to her." Robert approached the bed, not knowing exactly what to say. 23 years had passed since the last time he had spoken with Margaret Wilson. She had been his teacher at Lincoln Public High School in the Greenwich Village neighborhood. "Teacher, it's Robert. Robert Johnson from the 1998 class," he said softly. This time, the reaction was clearer. Margaret moved her head slightly toward the voice. Dr. Michael was dumbfounded. In 3 months, this was the patient's first voluntary response. "How exactly do you know her?" asked the doctor, now completely interested. Robert took a deep breath. The story he had kept for so many years was painful, but perhaps it was necessary now. "She saved my life when I was a child," began Robert. "I was only 12 and going through a very difficult time at home. My parents had separated, my mother worked 3 jobs to support us, and I was practically left to my own devices." Margaret moved her fingers again, this time more noticeably. "Continue," requested Dr. Michael, fascinated. "I was missing a lot of classes, getting involved with older boys who weren't good influences. One day teacher Margaret called me after class and said she knew what I was going through." Robert moved closer to the bed, his voice becoming more emotional. "She not only offered me free tutoring, but also gave me a job taking care of the school garden. Every day after classes I stayed there with her learning about plants, about life. She paid me a symbolic amount of money, but the most important thing was the attention she gave me." The monitors in the room began to show small changes in Margaret's vital signs. Her blood pressure had risen slightly, and her heart rate had increased. "This is extraordinary," murmured Dr. Michael. "In 3 months, we haven't had any response like this." Robert continued speaking, the memories flowing naturally. "She taught me everything about gardening. How to care for the soil, when to plant, how plants communicate with each other. She said that gardening was a form of therapy, that taking care of something living taught us to take care of ourselves." Margaret opened and closed her eyes slowly, as if trying to wake from a very deep dream. "I graduated, got a job, started a family. All thanks to that teacher," said Robert, now with tears in his eyes. "But I lost touch with her when the school closed for renovation, and she was transferred. Dr. Michael knew he was witnessing something revolutionary for the case. He decided to take an action that could be controversial. Mr. Robert, would you work with gardening here at the hospital?" "Yes, doctor, for 5 years. Would you like to include him in Mrs. Margaret's treatment? Obviously, it would have to be something authorized by the family and the hospital, but the results we just witnessed are—" "What results?" A harsh voice interrupted the conversation. Patricia Wilson Parker, 45 years old, entered the room wearing an expensive pantsuit and an expression of irritation. Her blonde hair was impeccably styled, and she carried a designer bag that cost more than Robert earned in a year. "Who is this man? Why is he in my mother's room?" asked Patricia, visibly bothered. "Mrs. Patricia, this is Robert Johnson, a hospital employee. He knew your mother, and we just witnessed her first positive response in 3 months." Patricia looked Robert up and down, assessing his simple clothes and his hands calloused from work. "I don't authorize any strangers to disturb my mother. She is in a delicate state and cannot be exposed to stressful situations." "But ma'am, he caused a positive reaction," insisted Dr. Michael. "Doctor, I pay a fortune for my mother to have the best treatment available. I won't accept random employees coming here to experiment on her." Robert felt humiliated but didn't want to cause a scene. He picked up his watering can and headed for the door. "Teacher," he said softly before leaving, "I'll be back to take care of your plants." Margaret moved her head again, this time more noticeably. Patricia noticed the movement and was clearly uncomfortable. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Robert couldn't stop thinking about Margaret. During his work in the hospital garden, his hands automatically tended to the plants while his mind was in room 312. He had found out through conversations with other staff that Margaret had been hospitalized since May, when she was found at home by the maid in a state of complete shock. No one knew exactly what had caused her condition. Robert decided to do some research of his own. After some back and forth talking, he learned from Mrs. Robinson from housekeeping that Margaret had had a very serious argument with her daughter before the episode. "Poor Mrs. Margaret," said Mrs. Robinson, lowering her voice. "I heard that the daughter sold some properties without her knowing. The woman was in shock when she found out. Robert was outraged. He had known Margaret since he was a child and knew she was a person of principles. The idea of someone taking advantage of her made him furious. That afternoon, he decided to visit Margaret again. He waited for Patricia to leave after her daily visit and went to the room. The nurse, Jennifer, was on duty. "Robert, you shouldn't be here. Her daughter was very clear." "Just 5 minutes, Jennifer, please. You saw her reaction yesterday." Jennifer looked around and sighed. 5 minutes. But if anyone shows up, you run out of here." Robert entered the room. Margaret was in the same position, looking at the ceiling. He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "Hi, teacher. It's me again, Robert." This time, Margaret turned her face toward him. Her eyes seemed to be trying to focus as if she were fighting an internal fog. "I brought something for you," said Robert, pulling a small basil sprout in a plastic cup from his pocket. "Do you remember when you taught me about herbs? You said basil was good for calming the mind." Margaret's eyes fixed on the little plant. For the first time in 3 months, she seemed truly present. Robert placed the sprout on the nightstand next to the bed. "Teacher, I don't know what happened to you, but I want you to know that those afternoons in the school garden were the best of my life. You taught me that every garden needs time, patience, and love to flourish." Margaret moved her right hand, as if wanting to touch the plant, but she didn't have enough strength. "I'll take care of you, just like you took care of me," promised Robert. "What are you doing here?" Robert turned and saw Dr. Michael standing in the doorway, but this time he didn't seem angry. "Doctor, Relax, Robert. I came to check her vitals and saw you coming in. How is she reacting?" "Better than yesterday, Doctor. She looked at the plant I brought." Dr. Michael approached and observed Margaret carefully. He checked her pupils, tested some reflexes. There really is an improvement, small but significant. At that moment, Margaret made a sound. It wasn't quite a word, but it was definitely an intentional sound. "My God," whispered Dr. Michael, "she's trying to speak." Robert leaned in closer. "What are you trying to say, teacher?" Margaret moved her lips, making a visible effort. The sound that came out was weak, but both understood. "Garden," Robert completed, emotional. "She said garden." Dr. Michael was astonished. He knew he was witnessing something that would completely change Margaret's treatment. "Robert, I need to speak with you about a proposal." The two left the room to talk in the hallway. "What you've done in 2 days, we haven't managed in 3 months. I know the family is opposed, but as a doctor, I have an obligation to explore any possibility of recovery." "What are you proposing, Doctor?" "I'd like you to make regular visits to her. Of course, it would have to be discreet until we can convince the family, but the results are undeniable." Robert was silent for a moment, thinking about the responsibility this represented. "Doctor, I would do anything for Teacher Margaret. But what if her daughter finds out?" "Leave that to me. I'll talk to the hospital board. What's important now is the patient's recovery." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He spent hours thinking about Margaret, about the school days, about everything she had done for him. He decided that no matter what happened, he wouldn't abandon his teacher. The next morning, he arrived at the hospital determined. He had prepared a plan. Instead of visiting Margaret during work hours, he would change his routine. He would arrive earlier to tend to the outdoor gardens and take advantage of the times when Patricia wasn't at the hospital. His first discovery was that Patricia had a very defined routine. She visited her mother between 10 and 11 in the morning, always accompanied by a younger woman whom Robert discovered was her lawyer. "That's strange, Aunt," he thought. "Why does she need a lawyer to visit her own mother?" Robert decided to investigate a little more. During the staff breakfast, he struck up a conversation with old George, who had been a security guard at the hospital for 15 years. "Old George, do you know the family of Mrs. Margaret in room 312? "Oh, yes, I do. Complicated family. The daughter comes here every single morning, but it's not out of daughterly affection, no. It seems more like an obligation." "How so?" "Look, Robert, I don't like to talk about other people's lives, but ever since the lady arrived here, her daughter only asks about inheritance, about documents. I've never seen her cry or show genuine concern." This information disturbed Robert deeply. He began to better understand what might have caused Margaret's condition. At lunchtime, he decided to visit Margaret again. He brought with him a small rose bush that he had prepared especially for her. "Hi, teacher. I brought you a rose. Remember you taught me that roses need a lot of care to bloom." Margaret looked directly into his eyes for the first time. Robert felt a shiver. "Teacher, do you recognize me?" Margaret moved her lips and managed to whisper, "Yes, it's me, teacher." "Robert." Tears began to stream down Margaret's face. They were the first tears since her hospitalization. Robert took a handkerchief and gently dried her face. "Teacher, don't cry. I'm here now. I'll take care of you." Margaret made a huge effort and managed to lift her right hand a few inches. Robert gently held it. "Your hand is warm, teacher. That's a good sign." At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Robert immediately recognized the sound of Patricia's heels. "I have to go, teacher, but I'll be back tomorrow. I promise." Robert hid in the room's bathroom until Patricia entered. Then he discreetly left. In the following days, Robert established a secret routine. He visited Margaret always after lunch when Patricia had already left. He brought different plants each day and told stories about the school garden. The progress was evident. Margaret could already move both hands. Her eyes followed Robert when he moved around the room, and occasionally she could pronounce simple words. Dr. Michael documented everything discreetly. He knew he would need solid evidence to confront the family. One afternoon, Robert arrived at the room and found Margaret trying to sit up in bed. It was the first time she had shown physical initiative. "Teacher, you're trying to get up." Margaret looked at him and said clearly, "Water." It was the first complete word she had spoken in 3 months. Robert ran to get water and helped her drink. Margaret drank slowly but managed to swallow without difficulty. "Teacher, you're improving so much. I'm so happy." Margaret looked him in the eyes and said, "Thank you." Robert began to cry. It was the confirmation that his teacher was coming back. "You don't have to thank me, teacher. You did much more for me." Margaret made an effort and managed to say, "Patricia, bad." Robert understood immediately. Margaret was trying to tell him what had happened with her daughter. "Teacher, don't worry about that now. The important thing is for you to get better." But Margaret insisted, "House sold." Robert was shocked. So what Mrs. Robinson had mentioned was true. Teacher, Patricia sold your house? Margaret nodded and new tears began to fall. Without permission. Robert felt immense anger. Now everything made sense. Margaret had discovered that her daughter sold her properties without authorization, and that caused the emotional shock that left her in a catatonic state. Teacher, let's report this. What she did is a crime. But Margaret shook her head negatively. No. Proof. Robert understood the dilemma. Margaret knew it would be difficult to prove what happened, especially in her current state. Teacher, first let's focus on your recovery. Then we'll think about the rest. At that moment, they heard loud voices in the hallway. Robert recognized Patricia's voice, but there was someone else with her. I don't accept that staff have access to my mother without my authorization. This is unacceptable. Robert realized he had been discovered. He looked at Margaret with concern. Teacher, I think they're going to forbid me from coming here. Margaret held his hand with surprising strength and said, Don't let them. The door opened and Patricia entered furiously, followed by Dr. Michael and a woman Robert didn't know. It's him, shouted Patricia, pointing at Robert. Dr. Michael, I demand this man be removed immediately and banned from this ward. Dr. Michael tried to intervene. Mrs. Patricia, I need to explain the results we're getting. I don't care. My mother is in a vegetative state and can't be disturbed by strangers. She is not in a vegetative state, Dr. Michael retorted firmly, and this man has been achieving extraordinary results. To prove his point, Dr. Michael addressed Margaret. Mrs. Margaret, how are you feeling today? To everyone's surprise, Margaret responded clearly, better. Patricia was dumbfounded. It was the first time she'd heard her mother speak since hospitalization. This is impossible, she murmured. The woman accompanying Patricia approached. Robert could tell by how she dressed and spoke that she was a lawyer. Dr. Cynthia Stevens, she introduced herself. I'm the family lawyer. I need to better understand this situation. Dr. Michael explained all the progress Margaret had shown since Robert started visiting her. In 3 months of hospitalization, she hadn't uttered a single word. Since Robert began visiting a week ago, she can already speak, move, and even drink water by herself. Dr. Cynthia looked at Margaret. Mrs. Margaret, do you recognize this man? Teacher. Robert, Margaret answered, with some difficulty but clearly. How do you know him? My student. Patricia was visibly uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. Mother, this man might be taking advantage of your condition. Margaret looked directly at her daughter and said something that shocked everyone. You sold house. A heavy silence filled the room. Patricia turned pale. Mother, I don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. But Margaret insisted, without permission. Dr. Cynthia immediately grasped the accusation's gravity. Mrs. Margaret, are you saying your daughter sold your property without your authorization? Margaret nodded. Dr. Michael, I need to speak with you privately, said Dr. Cynthia. The three left the room, leaving Robert and Margaret alone. Teacher, everything will be resolved now. You were very brave. Margaret smiled for the first time in 3 months. It was a weak smile, but genuine. Thank you for coming back. Robert held her hand. I'll never leave you alone again, teacher. In the hallway, the conversation was tense. Dr. Cynthia, as family lawyer, are you aware of any recent property sale? Asked Dr. Michael. Patricia hired me to regularize some estate matters due to her mother's temporary incapacity, but I always understood there was prior authorization. Patricia tried to defend herself. My mother was beginning to show signs of mental confusion. I was just protecting the family estate. But Mrs. Patricia, your mother is clearly lucid now, and the accusation she made is very serious, Dr. Michael countered. Dr. Michael, legally, what does this mean? Asked Dr. Cynthia. It means if Mrs. Margaret didn't authorize the sale, there might have been document forgery. That's a crime. Patricia became desperate. Listen, my mother is clearly in a state of confusion. She can barely speak properly. On the contrary, said Dr. Michael, For the first time in 3 months, she's demonstrating mental clarity. And interestingly, this coincides with the beginning of Robert's visits. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Dr. Cynthia was visibly worried. As a lawyer, she knew this could involve a very complicated situation. Patricia, I need you to explain exactly how you got your mother's authorization for the sales. She signed the documents. I have all the signatures. But was she in a condition to understand what she was signing? Patricia hesitated before answering, and this hesitation didn't go unnoticed by Dr. Michael. Dr. Cynthia, I think we need to involve the hospital's legal department. This situation could have criminal implications. I agree, Patricia. Do you have the sales documents? They're in my car, but I don't understand why you're questioning my conduct. I'm the only child and natural heir. The problem isn't the inheritance, explained Dr. Cynthia. It's the question of legal capacity at the time of signing. If your mother already showed signs of incapacity, the sales could be voided. Robert, who had stayed in the room with Margaret, was helping her sit up better in bed when she managed to say, Robert, I need to tell. Tell me, Professor, I'm listening. Margaret took a deep breath and began to speak, still with difficulty but increasingly clearly. Patricia came home, brought papers, said hospital, expensive. Robert listened attentively, helping her when she couldn't pronounce some words. I signed without reading, trusted her. And then you found out what the papers were. Lawyer called, asked about sale. Didn't understand. Margaret began to get emotional again. I went, notary, country house sold, downtown apartment, sold. Robert was shocked. It wasn't just one property, but several. Professor, how many properties did she sell? All except this one. Robert understood that this one referred to the house where Margaret lived. I confronted her. She yelled at me, said it was her right. And that's when you fell ill? Margaret nodded. Felt world spinning. Then don't remember anything. Robert was moved by Margaret's courage in telling her story. Professor, now I understand why you ended up like this. It must have been a terrible shock. 40 years, working, saving, for her. Margaret's words were like punches to Robert's heart. He knew her dedication as a teacher, knew she had always been a generous and hard-working person. Professor, we'll fix this. You're not alone. At that moment, Dr. Michael returned to the room accompanied by Dr. Martin Reynolds, the hospital's clinical director. Mrs. Margaret, how are you feeling? Better, doctor. Dr. Martin was impressed with Margaret's lucidity. Robert, can we talk in the hallway? The 3 men left the room. Robert, I just learned about the situation. Dr. Michael explained to me the extraordinary results you've been achieving with Mrs. Margaret. Doctor, she was very important in my life. I'm just returning the affection she gave me. I understand. But now we have a complex situation. The patient's daughter is threatening to sue the hospital if we continue allowing your visits. Robert felt his heart tighten. Are you going to forbid me from seeing Professor Margaret? On the contrary, said Dr. Martin, we're going to formalize your participation in her treatment as a volunteer occupational therapist. Robert didn't quite understand. What do you mean, doctor? You'll be registered as part of Mrs. Margaret's rehabilitation team. This will give you legal rights to visit her, regardless of family authorization. Dr. Michael smiled. Robert, you've just been promoted. But I have no training in therapy. You have something better, said Dr. Martin. You have the key to her recovery, and that's what matters. Robert was moved. He never imagined that caring for plants would lead him to help in the recovery of his former teacher. There's one condition, continued Dr. Martin. You'll need to take a basic course in hospital care, but you can start immediately. I accept, Doctor. I'll do anything for Mrs. Margaret. Great. Now let's settle the matter with the family. I've called Dr. Rachel Smith, our in-house attorney, to advise us. At that moment, Dr. Rachel arrived on the floor. She was a woman of about 50, with a serious but welcoming appearance. Dr. Martin, I've been informed about the situation. Where is the patient's daughter? In the meeting room with her lawyer. Perfect. Let's clarify some important legal matters. When they arrived at the meeting room, Patricia was visibly nervous. Dr. Cynthia had stepped out to make some calls. Mrs. Patricia, began Dr. Rachel, I need to inform you about your mother's rights as a patient. What rights? I'm her legal guardian. Actually, no. Your mother is lucid and capable of making her own medical decisions. Therefore, she has the right to choose whoever she wants to participate in her treatment. Patricia turned pale. Furthermore, continued Dr. Rachel, the accusations she made against you are very serious. Selling property without authorization is a crime against assets. My mother is confused. She signed all the documents. That will have to be determined by an investigation. Meanwhile, the hospital has an obligation to protect the patient. Dr. Martin joined the conversation. Mrs. Patricia, unfortunately, I'm going to have to request that you only visit your mother accompanied by a hospital staff member. This is absurd. I'm her daughter. And that's exactly why we need to be careful. Family conflicts can harm the patient's recovery. Patricia stood up furiously. You'll regret this. I'll sue this hospital for negligence and for allowing strangers to manipulate my mother. Ma'am, you have every right to sue, but we have a duty to protect the patient, replied Dr. Rachel calmly. Patricia stormed out of the room, slamming the door. Dr. Martin sighed. Robert, I think you'll have to be very careful. This woman won't give up easily. Doctor, may I ask a question? Why is Mrs. Margaret so important to the hospital? You're taking risks for her. Dr. Michael and Dr. Martin exchanged glances. Robert, there's something you don't know about Mrs. Margaret, said Dr. Michael. What, Doctor? She was one of the founders of our therapeutic garden program. 10 years ago, when she was still an active teacher, she came to us with a proposal to create a green space to help in patient recovery. Robert was surprised. The hospital garden was her idea. Not just the idea, said Dr. Martin. She donated the money to build it. And for 5 years, she came here voluntarily to teach gardening to rehabilitation patients. Robert began to understand why Margaret meant so much to the hospital. That's why you're supporting me. Exactly. Margaret Wilson did a lot for this hospital and for our patients. Now it's our turn to give back. And besides, added Dr. Michael, you're achieving results that none of us could. As doctors, our obligation is to explore every possibility for healing. Robert felt honored and frightened at the same time. He never imagined he would be at the center of such a complex situation. I'll do my best for you, and especially for Mrs. Margaret. We know you will, said Dr. Martin. Now, let's get back to her. I'm sure she's worried. When they returned to the room, Margaret was trying to sit up by herself in bed. It was impressive progress. Professor, you're managing to sit up. Margaret smiled upon seeing Robert. I was worried. I heard shouting. Dr. Martin approached. Mrs. Margaret, I have good news. Robert is now officially part of your treatment team. Margaret looked at Robert with gratitude. Thank you, Robert. Professor, I have a surprise for you. Robert left the room and returned with a small pot containing a jasmine sprout. Remember you taught me that jasmine represents hope. Margaret took the pot with both hands, which were already much steadier. It's beautiful. Professor, the doctors told me you created the hospital garden. Margaret smiled nostalgically. I always believed that plants heal. And you were right. Look how you're recovering. Dr. Michael took the opportunity to perform some basic neurological tests with Margaret. He checked reflexes, motor coordination, and concentration ability. Extraordinary, he murmured. Mrs. Margaret, can you tell me what day it is today? Margaret thought for a moment. August. Tuesday. It was almost correct. It was a Tuesday in August, but she couldn't recall the exact date. And can you tell me how long you've been in the hospital? A long time, months. Dr. Michael was impressed. Margaret's temporal and spatial orientation was almost fully recovered. Robert, in 1 week, you've achieved what 3 months of conventional treatment couldn't. Doctor, I think the professor just needed something to connect her with life again. Margaret looked at Robert. You brought me back. No, Professor. You were always here. You just needed a reason to return. At that moment, Nurse Jennifer entered the room. Sorry to interrupt, but the patient's daughter is back. She's in the elevator with 2 other people. Dr. Michael sighed. Robert, I think it's best if you leave for a few minutes. Let's see what she wants now. Don't go, said Margaret, holding Robert's hand. Professor, it's just for a moment. I promise I'll come back. Robert left through the room's bathroom, as he had done before. He hid in the equipment room next door. Patricia entered the room accompanied by 2 people, a man in a suit who appeared to be a lawyer, and an older woman whom Robert didn't recognize. Mother, I brought Dr. Silver, a neurology specialist, to evaluate your condition. Margaret looked suspiciously at the man. I don't need another doctor. Mrs. Margaret, said Dr. Silver, your daughter is concerned about your ability to make important decisions. I'd like to perform some tests. I don't want to. Patricia became irritated. Mother, he needs to verify whether you're truly capable of managing your own affairs. Dr. Michael intervened. With all due respect, Dr. Silver, but I am the physician in charge of the patient. Any external evaluation must be authorized by me. Dr. Michael, I am a neurologist with 20 years of experience. The family has the right to request a second opinion. You're right, but only if it's conducted within the hospital's protocols. The older woman accompanying Patricia introduced herself. I am Dr. Lucy Foster, a psychiatrist. I was called to assess Mrs. Margaret's mental capacity. Margaret became clearly agitated. I'm not crazy. Dr. Michael noticed that the situation was stressing Margaret, and her vital signs began to change. I must ask everyone to leave. The patient is becoming agitated. Dr. Michael, said Patricia, my mother needs to be properly evaluated. There are signs that she might be being manipulated. Manipulated by whom? By that gardener you allowed to get close to her. Doctor, Frank became irritated. Mrs. Patricia, the gardener achieved more results in 1 week than we did in 3 months. Your mother was in a catatonic state, and now she's speaking, moving, and showing lucidity. Dr. Silver approached Margaret. Mrs. Margaret, I'd like to ask a few simple questions. I don't want to answer. Mother, cooperate with the doctor, insisted Patricia. I want Robert. The mere mention of Robert's name made Patricia furious. See, this man has created a psychological dependency in her. This is manipulation. Dr. Michael had reached his limit of patience. Mrs. Patricia, your mother has the right to choose who she wants with her. If she wants Robert here, he stays. Doctor, this isn't medical protocol, intervened Dr. Silver. Medical protocol? Where was medical protocol when she spent 3 months not responding to any treatment? Retorted Dr. Michael. The tension in the room was rising, and Margaret began to look visibly distressed. Her heart rate accelerated, and she started having difficulty breathing. Enough, shouted Dr. Michael. Everyone out now. Dr. Martin appeared at the door, drawn by the commotion. What's going on here? Dr. Martin, the family brought outside doctors to evaluate the patient, and it's causing unnecessary stress. Doctor, Martin looked at Margaret, who was clearly agitated, and made a decision. Mrs. Patricia, I'm going to have to ask you and your colleagues to leave. The patient is under stress, and this could harm her recovery. Dr. Martin, these professionals were hired by the family for an independent evaluation, said the lawyer accompanying Patricia, and they can do the evaluation as long as it's properly scheduled and doesn't cause stress to the patient. Today is not the day. Patricia was furious but had no choice but to leave. You'll regret this. I'll go to court if necessary. After everyone left, Dr. Michael called Robert back. "Teacher, how are you feeling?" Margaret was visibly shaken. "Scared, Robert." "You don't need to be afraid, teacher. I'm here." Dr. Michael checked Margaret's vital signs, which were gradually returning to normal. "Robert, she needs calm now. Maybe it's best if you stay with her until she stabilizes." "Of course, Doctor." "Doctor." Michael left the room, leaving Robert and Margaret alone. "Teacher, take a deep breath. Everything's all right now." Margaret held Robert's hand. "She wants to commit me psychiatric." Robert was shocked. "How do you know that?" "Heard conversation. Hers hallway. Yesterday." Robert understood that Margaret was more aware than everyone imagined. "Teacher, that won't happen. The doctors here know you're improving." "Robert, if they take me, promise, not forget." "Teacher, no one is going to take you. And I'll never forget you, just like I never forgot everything you taught me." Margaret relaxed a bit, but was still worried. "House, sold, everything." "Teacher, we'll sort this out. But first, let's focus on your full recovery." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Robert realized he needed to better understand Margaret's entire financial situation to properly help her. "Teacher, do you have any other relatives besides Patricia?" "I have nephew, Frank, but lives far." "Does he know about your situation?" "I don't know. Patricia doesn't like him." Robert decided he needed to investigate further. If Margaret had other relatives, they could help with the situation. "Teacher, do you remember your nephew's full name?" "Frank Wilson Parker, son. My brother. Where does he live?" "Los Angeles. Last I heard." Robert Johnson mentally noted this information. Perhaps he could find Frank and inform him about the situation. "Teacher, I'll try to contact your nephew. He might help." "That would be good. He always was honest." At that moment, Dr. Michael Anderson returned to the room with a worried expression. "Robert, I need to talk with you." They went out into the hallway. "The situation is getting complicated. The family obtained a court order for an independent psychiatric evaluation." Robert felt his heart tighten. "What does that mean, Doctor?" "It means that, whether we like it or not, Margaret will have to undergo an evaluation with the doctors Patricia brought." "And if they say she's not competent?" "Then Patricia could get legal guardianship over her and make all decisions for her." Robert became desperate. "But Teacher, Margaret is clearly improving." "I know that, you know that, but the judicial system might not see it that way, especially if the doctors hired by the family produce a negative report. What can we do?" "We have 48 hours to prepare the best possible defense. I need you to help me document all her progress." "How, Doctor?" "We'll record videos of her speaking, demonstrating lucidity, answering complex questions. We want unambiguous proof that she's mentally capable." Robert liked the idea. "I can help by having her recall specific things from the past. If she can tell precise details from when she was a teacher, that proves her memory is intact." "Excellent idea. Let's start now." They returned to the room and explained the situation to Margaret. "Teacher, we need to prove that you're mentally well. We're going to record you talking about your life." Margaret understood immediately. "To prove I'm not crazy." "Exactly. Can you tell us some stories from when you were a teacher?" Margaret smiled. Of course, I can." Dr. Michael started recording with his tablet. "Mrs. Margaret, can you tell us your full name and your profession?" "Margaret Wilson Smith. I was a teacher. Lincoln Public High School, Greenwich Village." "For how many years were you a teacher?" 42 years. "And do you remember any special students?" Margaret looked at Robert. "Robert Johnson, difficult boy, but good heart, taught him, gardening. Dr. Michael was impressed with the precision of her answers. Mrs. Margaret, can you tell us about the properties you owned before you got sick? Margaret's expression changed, becoming more serious. House, where I lived. Blossom. Street. Number, 125. Apartment. Downtown, Liberty. Street. 340, Country. House. Montauk. Pleasant. View. Farm. And what happened to those properties? Patricia. Sold. Them. Without authorization. Forged. Signature. Dr. Michael was getting exactly what he needed, clear demonstration of lucidity and detailed memory. How did you find out about the sales? Lawyer called asking about sale. Montauk. I went county clerk to check. All sold. And how did you feel when you found out? Margaret began to get emotional. Betrayed, shocked. 40 years me saving that's to leave inheritance for her. And what happened after this discovery? I confronted Patricia. She yelled, said it was her right, felt everything. Go dark. Dr. Michael stopped the recording. He had enough material to prove that Margaret was not only lucid, but also had detailed memory and emotional analysis capacity. Teacher, you were fantastic. This will help a lot. Robert, now I need you to help me with something else, said Dr. Michael. What, doctor? I need you to find her nephew. If he can testify in her favor, we'll have a much stronger case. I was already thinking about that. She gave me his name, Frank Wilson Parker, lives in Los Angeles. Great. I'll ask the hospital's legal department to help you locate him. At that moment, Nurse Jennifer entered the room. Excuse me, but there's a woman here who says she's a friend of Mrs. Margaret Wilson. A Mrs. Mary something. Margaret perked up immediately. Mary. Oliver. My friend. Can I let her in? Asked Jennifer. Of course, said Dr. Michael. Mrs. Mary entered the room. She was a woman of about 65, well-dressed but simply. Her expression of relief upon seeing Margaret awake was touching. Margaret, thank God you're better, said Mary, rushing to hug her friend. Margaret returned the hug tightly. Mary, how long? Friend, I tried to visit you several times, but your daughter said you couldn't receive visitors. I only managed to get in today because I said I was your sister. Dr. Michael became interested. Mrs. Mary, how long have you known Margaret? Over 30 years. We worked together at the school. She was my principal for 15 years. Robert realized Mary could be an important witness. Mrs. Mary, did you know about teacher Margaret's financial problems? Mary became serious. I knew something was wrong. Margaret called me about 4 months ago, desperate, saying Patricia was forcing her to sign papers she didn't understand. Dr. Michael became immediately interested. Did she share details of that conversation? Margaret said Patricia would come home with lawyers and papers, pressuring her to sign quickly. She said it was to protect her assets, but Margaret was suspicious. And why didn't she seek help? She tried. She went to a lawyer, but Patricia found out and was furious. She threatened to stop taking care of her if she kept causing trouble. Margaret confirmed with her head. True, she threatened me. Robert was becoming outraged by what he was learning about Patricia. Mrs. Mary, could you testify about this if necessary? Of course. Margaret is like a sister to me. I won't let anyone take advantage of her. Dr. Michael was satisfied. Now they had an external witness who could corroborate Margaret's story. Mrs. Mary, is there anything else we should know? Well, there's something that always puzzled me. Patricia never showed interest in her mother until about 5 years ago, when Margaret retired and mentioned the assets she had accumulated. How so? Margaret told me that Patricia kept complaining that her mother was too tight-fisted, that she didn't spend money on anything. But when she found out Margaret had several properties, she suddenly became very attentive. Margaret sighed. I thought she had changed. Mrs. Mary, would you have the contact information for Margaret's nephew, Frank? Yes, I do. In fact, he's been trying to reach Margaret for months. Patricia said she was too sick to take calls. Dr. Michael saw an opportunity. Could you contact him now? I can try. Mary took out her phone and dialed a number. Frank? It's Mary, your Aunt Margaret's friend. I have good news and bad news for you. Robert could hear Frank's voice on the other end, clearly worried. The good news is your aunt is awake and much better. The bad news is there's a serious problem with Patricia and her assets. Mary briefly explained the situation. Frank was silent for a moment before responding. He wants to speak with Margaret, said Mary. Margaret took the phone with trembling hands. Frank, my dear. The conversation lasted a few minutes. Margaret cried when she heard her nephew's voice, and Frank also got emotional, realizing she was truly okay. When Margaret handed back the phone, Mary informed them, he's coming to New York City tomorrow morning. He's very worried and wants to better understand what happened. Dr. Michael smiled. Perfect. Now we have witnesses, supportive family members, and medical documentation. We'll be well prepared for the evaluation. Robert felt more confident. Teacher, I think we'll be able to sort everything out. Margaret took his hand. Robert, thank you for not giving up on me. Teacher, you never gave up on me when I was a child. Now it's my turn to take care of you. Mary was moved witnessing that scene. Margaret, you were lucky to have a student like Robert. No, it wasn't luck. It was affection. Coming back. Dr. Michael decided it was time to let Margaret rest. Everyone, I think we should let Mrs. Margaret rest. Tomorrow will be an important day. Doctor, can I stay until she falls asleep? Asked Robert. Of course. Mary, you can also stay a bit longer if you'd like. Thank you, Doctor. It's been so long since I've properly talked with my friend. Dr. Michael left the room, leaving Robert, Mary, and Margaret talking. It was the first time in months that Margaret was surrounded by people who truly cared about her. Margaret, do you have any idea how much money Patricia managed to get from the sales? Asked Mary. Margaret thought for a moment. House, Montauk, would be worth $500,000. Apartment. Shadowntown had 300,000 country house and 200,000. Robert was shocked. It was almost $1 million. Teacher, that's a lot of money. We need to recover it. I don't know if we can. She might have spent it already. Margaret, don't think about that now, said Mary. The important thing is that you're better and have people fighting for you. Margaret smiled. I feel like I'm being reborn. Robert noticed Margaret was truly transforming. With each passing day, she grew stronger, more lucid, more herself. Teacher, remember when you told me that taking care of plants was like taking care of life? I remember. I think I understand better now. You were dormant like a seed, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. Margaret became emotional. Robert, you've always been a poet. Mary looked at them affectionately. Margaret, this boy grew up and became a special man. I knew he would. At that moment they heard raised voices in the hallway. Robert immediately recognized Patricia's voice. She's back, said Robert. I don't want to see her, said Margaret, growing tense. Calm down, teacher. Let's see what she wants. Patricia entered the room, accompanied by a court officer. Mom, this is Officer Julie. She came to deliver a legal document. The officer approached the bed. Mrs. Margaret Wilson Smith? Yes. I have a summons for you to undergo a psychiatric evaluation tomorrow at 2 p.m. Margaret looked frightened at Robert. I don't want to. Ma'am, this is a court order. You are required to appear. Patricia had a smug smile on her face. Mom, it's just a formality. The doctors need to verify that you're okay. Mary became irritated. Patricia, your mother is clearly fine. What's the need for this? Mrs. Mary, with all due respect, but family matters are none of your business. Robert saw he needed to intervene. Patricia, why are you forcing this? Your mother is recovering well. And who are you to comment on my family? Retorted Patricia. I'm someone who genuinely cares about your mother, something you apparently don't do. Patricia became furious. How dare you speak to me like that? The court officer intervened. Please, remain calm. Mrs. Margaret, did you understand the summons? Margaret nodded her head but was visibly shaken. Well, my work here is done, said the officer, leaving the room. Patricia looked at Margaret. Mother, I need you to understand that this is for your own good. Margaret looked her in the eyes and said with surprising clarity, Patricia, you are not doing this for me. You're doing it for the money. Patricia was speechless for a moment. Mother, what nonsense is this? You sold everything. I built ends to my tired life. Now you want to declare me insane, to keep the rest. Mother, you're confused. I'm only trying to protect you. Margaret turned to Mary. Mary, did you hear? I heard everything, Margaret, and it wasn't confusion at all. Patricia realized the situation was getting complicated for her. Mrs. Mary, you shouldn't be here influencing my mother. Patricia, I've known your mother for 30 years. I know exactly how she is when she's well, and I can assure you she's lucid. Robert decided to be more direct. Patricia, why don't you just admit you sold your mother's properties without authorization? That's a lie. My mother signed everything. She signed without knowing what she was signing because you lied to her, Robert retorted. Margaret confirmed. True, she said they were hospital papers. Patricia was losing control. Mother, you haven't been well for months. I had to make decisions for you. Lies, said Margaret with a strength in her voice that surprised everyone. I was fine until I discovered your lies. Mary applauded. Well done, Margaret. Speak the truth. Patricia realized she was losing the argument. Tomorrow the doctors will prove my mother isn't fit to manage her life, and then I'll do what's best for her. And what would that be, Patricia? Asked Robert. Perhaps a specialized clinic where she gets proper care. Margaret was terrified. I don't want to go to the clinic. Robert immediately understood Patricia's plan. If she could have Margaret declared incompetent, she could commit her to a clinic and take full control of the remaining assets. Patricia, your mother doesn't need any clinic. She needs affection and respect. Respect? Who are you to talk about respect? Some gardener who appeared out of nowhere. I'm someone who learned from your mother the meaning of character and honesty, things she apparently couldn't teach you. Patricia stormed out of the room. Tomorrow, all this will be settled. After she left, the room fell silent for a few minutes. Robert, I'm scared, said Margaret. No need to be afraid, teacher. Tomorrow will show everyone that you're well. Mary held her friend's hand. Margaret, you have many people on your side. You're not alone. Dr. Michael entered the room at that moment. How are you all? I heard the court officer was here. Doctor, the evaluation is tomorrow at 2 p.m., Robert informed. All right, we'll be prepared. Margaret, how are you feeling? Scared, but determined. Great. That's exactly what we need. Determination and courage. Dr. Michael, her nephew arrives tomorrow morning, Mary informed. Perfect. The more family support, the better. Robert realized it was time for Margaret to rest. Teacher, I think you should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be an important day. Robert, will you be there? Of course, teacher. I won't leave you alone. Margaret smiled. Then I'll manage. Mary said goodbye to her friend. Margaret, I'll be here early tomorrow. Whether you're asleep or awake, you won't be alone. Thank you. Mary, thank you for not forgetting me. How could I forget my best friend? After Mary left, Robert arranged the plants in the room, placing them where Margaret could easily see them. "Teacher, the plants will stay here watching over you tonight." Margaret smiled. "Robert, can I ask you something?" "Anything, teacher. If tomorrow doesn't work out, promise, you'll keep tending the hospital garden?" "Teacher, don't talk like that. Everything will be fine. But if it doesn't, promise?" Robert held her hand. "I promise, but promise me you'll fight tomorrow." "I promise." "Then it's settled. Now sleep. You need to be rested." Robert stayed a few more minutes watching Margaret fall asleep. When she was sleeping deeply, he left the room with a heavy heart. In the hallway, he found Dr. Michael talking with Dr. Martin. "Robert, how is she?" "Worried, but determined." "Great. We're preparing too. We'll have a meeting at 9 a.m. to review the entire strategy." "Doctor, can I ask a question?" "Of course." "What happens if the psychiatrists declare her incompetent?" Dr. Martin and Dr. Michael exchanged glances. "Robert, let's be honest. If that happens, Patricia will get legal guardianship of Margaret. That means she'll decide where Margaret lives, how she's treated, and most importantly, she'll have total control over the remaining assets." Robert felt a chill in his stomach. "And there's nothing we can do?" "Yes, there is. We'll present all the evidence of improvement we've gathered. We'll show the videos, bring witnesses, and most importantly, we'll let Margaret speak for herself. And if that's not enough, then we'll appeal the decision. But honestly, Robert, with everything we have, I think we'll win." Robert hoped the doctors were right. The thought of Margaret being declared incompetent and committed to a clinic made him desperate. "Doctors, can I stay at the hospital tonight? I want to make sure no one disturbs Teacher Margaret." "Of course, there's a sofa in the doctor's lounge where you can rest." "Thank you." Robert spent the night sleeping poorly, worried about the next day. At 6 in the morning, he was already up, checking on Margaret. She was already awake, looking out the hospital room window. "Good morning, teacher." "Good morning. Robert, I couldn't sleep much." "It's normal to be nervous. But remember, today's the day we prove to everyone that you're well." Margaret smiled. "I'm feeling stronger today." "Great. How about we have a proper breakfast?" "That would be good." Robert asked the nutritionist to prepare a special breakfast for Margaret. He wanted her well-fed and energized for the evaluation. At 8 o'clock, Mary arrived accompanied by a tall man, about 40 years old, whom Robert recognized as Frank, Margaret's nephew. "Aunt Margaret!" Frank rushed to hug Margaret. "Frank, my dear, how you've grown." Frank was clearly emotional, seeing that his aunt was truly well. "Aunt, forgive me for not being here sooner. If I'd known what was happening..." "It's not your fault. Patricia wouldn't let anyone see me." "Well, now I'm here and we'll sort everything out." Robert introduced himself. "Frank, I'm Robert. I spoke with you yesterday on Mary's phone." "Robert, thank you for taking care of my aunt. Mary told me everything you've done. Your aunt did a lot for me when I was a child. Now it's my turn to repay her." Frank turned to Margaret. "Aunt, I need to know, did you really not authorize the property sales?" "No, Frank. She deceived me." "And are you sure you want to fight this?" Margaret looked at Frank with determination. "I want my dignity back." "Then you will. I brought my lawyer with me. He's already studying the case." At that moment, Dr. Michael and Dr. Martin entered the room. "Good morning, everyone. How is our patient feeling today?" "Better, doctors." "Great. Margaret, your evaluation will begin in 2 hours. Do you feel prepared?" "Yes." Dr. Martin addressed the group. "Everyone, I need to explain how this will work. Margaret will be evaluated by 3 professionals: a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a psychologist. Each will conduct specific tests to assess her mental capacity." "And can we be present?" asked Frank. "Unfortunately, no. The evaluation must be conducted without external interference. but after the evaluation, you will be able to present your considerations. Robert became worried. Doctor, what if she gets nervous alone? Robert, Margaret needs to show she is capable of handling situations on her own. That is part of the evaluation. Margaret noticed Robert's concern. Robert, I'll be fine. You taught me to be strong again. Teacher, you have always been strong. I just helped you remember that. Dr. Michael decided to use the 2 hours remaining to do a final preparation with Margaret. Margaret, shall we practice some questions they will likely ask? Let's. First, basic questions. What is your full name, age, where were you born? Margaret, Wilson, Smith, 72 years old, born in New York City. Perfect. Now can you tell me about your professional career? Public, school, teacher, 42 years, Lincoln, public, high school. And about your family? Daughter and Patricia, nephew, Frank, brother, deceased, John. Excellent. Now, about the current situation. Why are you in the hospital? Margaret became serious. Catatonic state after finding out that daughter sold properties without authorization. And how did you find out? Lawyer called asking about the sale. I went to the county clerk's office to check. Dr. Michael was impressed with the clarity and precision of her answers. Margaret, you are perfect. Remember, be honest, be direct, and don't be afraid to talk about your feelings. I'll remember. At 1:30 p.m. the time came. Margaret was taken to a special room in the hospital where the evaluation would take place. Robert, Frank, Mary, and the doctors remained in the waiting room, anxious. How long could it take? Asked Robert. Up to 3 hours, replied Dr. Martin. 3 hours, exclaimed Frank. It's a comprehensive evaluation. They will test memory, reasoning, judgment ability, emotional stability, temporal and spatial orientation. Robert was nervous. What if she gets tired and can't answer well? Robert, Margaret is much better than she was a week ago. I am confident she will do well. Meanwhile, in the evaluation room, Margaret was seated before the 3 professionals hired by Patricia. Dr. Silver, the neurologist, began the evaluation. Mrs. Margaret, I'm going to do some motor coordination tests. Can you raise your arms? Margaret raised both arms without difficulty. Now, can you touch your nose with your index finger? Margaret performed the test perfectly. Excellent. Dr. Lucy, you may begin your part. The psychiatrist approached. Mrs. Margaret, I'm going to ask you some questions about your life. Can you tell me about your childhood? I was born in New York City in 1951. Hard-working, parents, studied, public, school, always wanted to be a teacher. And your professional life? I started teaching at 22 years old, worked at Lincoln Public High School until retirement. Can you tell me about any student who made a mark on your life? Margaret smiled. Robert Johnson, difficult boy, troubled family, taught him gardening. Today, he works at this hospital. Doctor Silver was surprised. The gardener who has been visiting you was your student. Yes, over 20 years ago. How do you feel about him? Proud. He became a good man. The psychologist, Dr. Anna, began her part. Mrs. Margaret, I'm going to show you some images, and I'd like you to tell me what you see. Margaret went through the visual tests without difficulty, demonstrating sharp perception and interpretation skills. Now I'm going to read some situations, and I'd like you to tell me how you would react. All right. If you found a wallet on the street, what would you do? Take it to the police, or look for the owner. If someone offered you money to lie in a testimony, what would you do? Refuse. Lies always cause trouble. If you discovered that someone in the family was stealing from you, what would your reaction be? Margaret became serious. I'd be hurt, but confront the person. Everyone deserves a chance to explain. The three professionals exchanged glances. So far, Margaret was passing all tests with flying colors. Dr. Silva decided to ask more specific questions about the family situation. Mrs. Margaret, your daughter says you were confused in recent months. How do you respond to that? I wasn't confused. I was being deceived. Can you explain further? Patricia brought papers to sign. Said they were for the hospital or bank. I trusted her. And when you discovered the truth, I was shocked. I couldn't believe my daughter could deceive me like that. How do you feel about her now? Margaret thought for a moment. Hurt, betrayed. But I still love her. She's my daughter. Dr. Lucy was impressed by the emotional maturity of the response. Mrs. Margaret, if you could decide about your life now, what would you do? I'd like to return home, resume normal life, maybe teach again. And about the property that was sold. I'd like to understand what happened and, if possible, recover what was done incorrectly. Are you capable of managing your own assets? I am. I managed my money for 50 years. Never had problems. Dr. Silva conducted the final memory and logical reasoning tests. Margaret answered math calculations, logical sequences, and general knowledge questions. After 2.5 hours, the evaluation was complete. Mrs. Margaret, thank you very much for your cooperation. We'll have the results in an hour. Margaret returned to her room where everyone was anxiously waiting. How did it go, Professor? Robert asked immediately. I think it went well. I answered everything I could. How did they treat you? They were polite, but I noticed they were surprised. Surprised by what? Frank asked. By my answers. I think they expected to find someone confused. Dr. Michael smiled. That's a good sign. If they were surprised, it means your answers were better than expected. At that moment, Patricia entered the room accompanied by her lawyer. How was the evaluation, Mother? Fine. I hope you were honest with the doctors. Margaret looked at her daughter. I've always been honest, Patricia. The problem is that you haven't. Patricia became uncomfortable. Mother, don't start with these accusations again. Frank stood up. Patricia, we need to talk. Frank, what are you doing here? Taking care of my aunt since you're not doing it properly. How dare you? How dare I, Patricia? You sold Aunt Margaret's properties without authorization. That's a crime. My mother signed everything after being deceived about what she was signing. Patricia's attorney intervened. Mr. Michael, any discussion about this must take place in the presence of attorneys. I agree. In fact, my attorney is already reviewing all the documentation. Patricia paled. What documentation? Copies of the sales contracts, bank records, everything we were able to obtain legally. Robert realized Michael was prepared for a legal battle. At 4:30 p.m., Dr. Silva, Dr. Lucy, and Dr. Anna entered the room with their conclusions. Everyone fell silent, waiting for the verdict. Dr. Silva began to speak. After a full evaluation of Mrs. Margaret Wilson Smith, we have reached the following conclusions. Robert held his breath. From a neurological standpoint, the patient shows no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other degenerative condition affecting her judgment. Michael smiled discreetly. From a psychiatric standpoint, Dr. Lucy continued, the patient demonstrates emotional stability, critical analysis skills, and maturity in handling complex situations. Patricia was growing nervous. And from a psychological standpoint, Dr. Anna concluded. Mrs. Margaret shows full capacity to make decisions about her life, manage her assets, and care for herself. What does this mean? Asked Dr. Michael. It means, said Dr. Silver, that Mrs. Margaret is in full mental and legal capacity. There is no medical justification for guardianship or interdiction. The silence in the room was broken by Robert, who couldn't contain his emotion. Professor, you did it, Margaret began to cry with joy. Thank you, Robert, for believing in me. Michael hugged his aunt. Aunt, now we'll sort everything out. Patricia was in shock. This is impossible. My mother was in a vegetative state for 3 months. Dr. Silver addressed her. Mrs. Patricia, your mother was in a catatonic state, which is very different from a vegetative state, and apparently the cause was emotional trauma, not mental illness. Emotional trauma. Yes, caused by discovering she had been deceived by someone she trusted. Patricia immediately understood the implication. Doctors, what happens now? Asked Michael. Now, Mrs. Margaret is free to make her own decisions about her life and her assets. Margaret looked at Patricia. Patricia, we need to talk. Seriously. Mother, I can explain. Not here. At home. When I leave the hospital. Dr. Michael approached. Margaret, when would you like to be discharged? When I can? It could be tomorrow if you wish. You are fully recovered. Robert grew concerned. Professor, are you sure you want to go home? Patricia lives there. It's my home. Robert, I won't leave because of her. Michael intervened. Aunt, may I stay with you for a few days until everything is settled? I'd be happy. Patricia realized she was losing control of the situation. Mother, I think it would be better for you to stay a few more days in the hospital to fully recover. No, Patricia, I'm fine, and I want to go home. Dr. Martin, who had observed the entire situation, addressed the group. Everyone, I think it's time to let Mrs. Margaret rest. It's been an intense day for her. Everyone agreed. Michael said goodbye to his aunt, promising to return the next day to take her home. Mary also said goodbye, happy to see her friend recovered. Robert was the last to say goodbye. Professor, I'm so happy everything worked out. Robert, thank you for giving me back my life. Professor, now that you're going back home, I need to say something. What? I'm going to miss our conversations here at the hospital a lot. Margaret smiled. Who said they're over? What do you mean? I'd like you to keep visiting me? Visiting. I have a garden at home that needs care. Robert was moved. It would be an honor, teacher. And, Robert, yes? I'd like you to help me with a project. What project? I want to open a gardening school for underprivileged youth, like you were. Robert was speechless. It was as if history was repeating itself, but now he could help other young people like he had been helped. Teacher, it would be the most important project of my life. Then it's decided. When I leave here, we'll start planning. Robert left the hospital that night with his heart full of gratitude and hope. The teacher who had changed his life in childhood had just changed it again in adulthood. The next day, Margaret was discharged. Michael arrived early to take her home, accompanied by his lawyer. Dr. Michael and Dr. Martin said goodbye personally. Margaret, it was an honor to care for you, and mainly, it was a life lesson to see your recovery. Thank you, doctors, for believing in me. Margaret, I'd like to make a proposal, said Dr. Martin. What? Proposal. We'd like you to consider resuming your volunteer work here at the hospital. Our patients would benefit greatly from your experience. Margaret was excited. I'd love to, as soon as I'm completely, well. Robert arrived to say goodbye. He was emotional but happy. Teacher, I'll visit you this weekend if I can. Of course, you can. By the way, Robert. Yes? I want to offer you a job. Robert was surprised. What job? Coordinator of the gardening school. We're going to create. But teacher, I don't have the qualifications for that. Robert, you have something much more important than academic qualifications. You have life experience and a good heart. Michael smiled. Robert, my aunt has always been very good at recognizing talents. Teacher, I accept with great pride. Great. Now, let's go home to resolve pending matters. The trip home was tense. Margaret knew she would have to confront Patricia about everything that had happened. When they arrived at the house on Blossom Street, Patricia was already there waiting with a serious expression. Mom, we need to talk. Yes, we do. Everyone sat in the living room. The house was exactly as Margaret had left it 3 months ago, but it seemed different after all that had happened. Patricia, Margaret began, why did I do this? Patricia took a deep breath. Mom, I was scared. Scared of a what? Scared that you would spend all the money on nonsense or that someone would take advantage of you. So, you decided to take advantage? First, Patricia lowered her head. It wasn't like that, Mom. I really thought I was protecting the family's assets. Michael intervened. Patricia, you sold the properties and deposited the money in your personal account. How does that protect the family's assets? I was going to transfer the money to a joint account. When? Asked Michael's lawyer. Patricia couldn't answer. Margaret looked at her daughter with sadness. Patricia, I worked 50 years to build this estate. I was going to leave everything to you when I passed away. Mom, I know I was wrong, but it was out of fear of losing you and having nothing. But you lost me. Anyway, Patricia, when a daughter deceives her mother, she loses much more than money. Patricia began to cry. Mom, forgive me. I didn't want things to get to this point. Margaret was silent for a few minutes, thinking, Patricia, I'm going to give me a chance to fix this. How, Mom? You will return all the money from the sales and will try to recover the properties. Mum, I spent some of the money on what? I paid off some debts, bought the new car, renovated my apartment. Frank was outraged. Patricia, you spent your mother's money on your own expenses? I was going to replace it all. How? Asked the lawyer. I don't know. Maybe by selling my apartment. Margaret sighed. Patricia, you will sell your apartment and return all the money to me. Then we'll see if we can recover the properties. And if I do this, will you forgive me? Margaret looked deeply into her daughter's eyes. Patricia, I forgive you because you are my daughter. But trust is another thing that you will have to earn back. Patricia nodded that she understood. And Patricia, yes, Mum, you will no longer live here. Mum, you broke my trust. I need time to heal from this. Frank supported his aunt's decision. Patricia, it's fair. You caused a lot of suffering for our aunt. Where will I live? You have friends. You have money to rent a place. You'll figure it out. Frank's lawyer intervened. Patricia, We have all the documents prepared for you to sign, transferring the money back and renouncing any claim to your mother's assets until she decides otherwise. Patricia read the documents carefully and signed everything without arguing. Mom, how long will it take for you to truly forgive me? I don't you know, Patricia, it depends on you showing me that you've changed. Patricia stood up to leave. Mum, I'm really sorry. I hope one day you can forgive me completely. I hope so, too, daughter. After Patricia left, the house fell silent. Aunt, how do you feel? Asked Frank, relieved, but sad. Sad why? It's hard to discover that your own daughter is capable of deceiving you like that. But Aunt, now you're free to live your life the way you want. Margaret smiled. Yes, and I have many plans. Over the weekend, Robert came to visit Margaret as he had promised. He brought seedlings of various plants to help revitalize the house's garden. How are you feeling at home, Professor? Well, but still recovering from everything. And the plans for the gardening school? I've already started thinking. I want it to be in a place where underprivileged youth can learn not just about plants, but about life. Robert got excited. Professor, I have an idea. What? What if we use the land of the old school where I studied? I heard it's been abandoned for years. That's a great idea. Let's look into it. In the following months, Margaret fully recovered. With the help of Robert and Frank, she managed to recover 2 of the 3 properties that Patricia had sold. The third one wasn't possible because the buyers didn't want to sell it back. The therapeutic gardening school became a reality. Margaret managed to rent the land of the old Lincoln Public High School and, together with Robert, created a social project that teaches gardening and life values to underprivileged youth. Patricia kept her word. She sold her apartment, returned the money, and gradually tried to rebuild the relationship with her mother. It took almost a year for Margaret to trust her again, but a mother's love spoke louder. Margaret returned to doing volunteer work at Mercy General Hospital, where she met Robert. Their therapeutic gardening program became a national benchmark, helping hundreds of patients in recovery. Robert became the official coordinator of the gardening school and also returned to studying, taking a course in social pedagogy. He married Nurse Jennifer, and they had 2 children, whom Margaret considers her honorary grandchildren. Dr. Michael and Dr. Martin wrote a scientific article about Margaret's case, showing how human connection and alternative therapy can be more effective than conventional treatments in certain cases. Michael moved to New York City to be closer to his aunt and became the legal administrator of her assets, a role he performs with complete transparency and honesty. End of story. What did you think of this story of overcoming and second chances? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most, and whether you believe in the power of small kindnesses to transform lives. If you have a similar story of gratitude or reunion, share it with us. Leave your like if the story touched your heart, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one.